notes that I've put on this piece. And if you want to, on your own copy, you can add your own notes, or maybe you're doing notes in your notebook. And when I talk about this one, there'll be some additional things for you to write down, but I'm going to go through the PDF as I annotated it. I got a question yesterday, somebody on their formative, because I forced you to ask me a question about the material. Somebody on their formative asked me, to what extent do I need to learn the background material on the authors? And that was a good question. So I kind of wanted to share that with everybody, because when I answer on formative, it's just that one person that's getting the answer to the question. And I do want you to read the background on the authors, just so that you have a context for their writing. I don't think that you need to memorize details about their childhood or who their parents were or anything like that. I just think that you need to know which authors belong in which period and basically what they were about. So if I say Jonathan Swift, you should know that that's a 17th century writer, and he was a satirist about, society and government. So Mary Wollstonecraft, you read about her and you can tell from her background that, her background kind of led to some of her work. So just kind of know that. But like these dates in here, I'm not going to ask you on what date did Mary Wollstonecraft leave her job to nurse her dying mother. I'm not going to ask you questions like that. If we were doing a course that was an entire semester on the Romantic period, then we would go into more depth with many more authors. But this is not that kind of a class. This isn't a concentrated class. This is a let's do everything class. So that's the short answer to that question. I do think it's good to know a little bit of background because it's contextual for the piece that you might be reading from that person. And it will also give you some significance of that writer's work, if that makes sense. But for the most part, I don't think that you need to spend tons of time making notes on that stuff. Focus on the literature instead, the pieces. All right, so Vindication of the Rights of Women, it cannot be understated the importance of this pamphlet. Pamphlet is a type of literature that we don't really see anymore. Nowadays, if you see a pamphlet, it's probably something at your doctor's office. It's about some drug or some STD or something. But pamphlets in the 17th, 18th, 19th century and through there are all about people putting out their political views and like their reasoning on different issues. So it's kind of like the way we might see a political program, like watching some people discuss on CNN or Fox News or something, the politics of the day. But the way that they did it, because they obviously didn't have television, was through these pamphlets, which were maybe anywhere from 15 to 35, 40 pages long. And that's kind of the discourse, the discussion that people had about societal issues. And people read these pamphlets, and some writers like responded to other pamphleteers and said, oh, this is my opinion on that. And so this is like a pamphlet that she wrote. And she has written, Mary Wollstonecraft has written other pamphlets, but A Vindication of the Rights of Women is remarkable in a lot of ways. Number one, it's sort of like that piece that we've been waiting for ever since The Wife of Bath and her prologue. Wife of Bath in her prologue is, has some opinions about women and equality and, sort of like the disparity between the sexes. And all through the Renaissance and on into the 17th and 18th centuries, we don't really hear about that. And it's not until we get to Mary Wollstonecraft really that we finally say, oh, wow, there's an idea. Let's talk about not keeping women from a decent education. And so that's basically what her piece is about. A vindication, if you need to define that, has to do with proof. So when you say this is a vindication, in a sense, a vindication can be like proving that you were right. I feel vindicated in saying whatever. But a vindication can also be like a statement of proof. And that's what she's getting at here with this pamphlet. We're only reading the introduction. It's a much longer piece. So you can think of the introduction that we read. It's maybe like 4 pages long. You can think of that as her thesis. And she's just laying out what she's going to argue later in the pamphlet because it's much, much longer. And I think it's a good kind of summary of her points. And I'm going to go through them with you. You can see my notes and stuff here on the text. I have my chat open, so if you want me to go into more detail about something, just let me know. All right, so some background. This piece is a response to another piece. Okay, so Mary Wollstonecraft wrote a piece called The Vindication of the Rights of Man a couple years before she wrote this one. And in it, she was responding to other pamphleteers who were starting to talk about equality. This is about the time of the French Revolution, starting to talk about whether or not we need aristocracy. Do we need a system where there's a king or a queen? Do we still need the lords and all of that stuff? Or can we move into more of a democratic, or as the British call it, a republican way of handling our government? Maybe the kings and queens are sort of antiquated. America's getting established at this point in time. So it's kind of like, is it time for us to think about average rights of everybody, not just the people who own land or who are wealthy? And so then there was some discourse back and forth about that. And then she wrote the pamphlet of Vindication of the Rights of Women, which is a different kind of argument. And in this piece, she's basically arguing that women ought to have the ability to work toward their potential in education. And the focus in this pamphlet is on education. So in some ways, it's about, equal rights, but it's also, in this case, about equal access to education. She's not, although it's a feminist piece, she's not arguing that men are horrible and women are better. She's just saying that in our society, we need to think about what women have access to in terms of their education. At this time, it's the late 18th century, and women didn't really go to school at all levels. If you were poor, your children worked. If you were middle class, then the hope would be that you would teach your daughters whatever tools it would be to snag somebody in society as a wife that would improve the family in wealth and status in the community. And that's not how many books she's read. It's more about, can she do needlepoint? Does she make good parties? Is she cute? That's what society is kind of presenting. That's what's going to get her married into a better situation to bring up that middle class family. And then women of the aristocracy, same thing. They just have to maintain that. So they needed to be beautiful. They needed to be able to decorate their homes. They needed to be able to entertain by playing, piano pieces. And it's never about having a political discussion with, the general people that are here at the party, or talking about philosophy. So the education that women were offered or had access to was extremely limited. Now, just imagine for a minute that you're an intelligent woman, right? Say that you're somebody who has a perfectly capable mind to work on things like physics, or think about things in the scientific or mathematics or philosophical realm. But you don't have access to those things. You can maybe read them in books in your house, but you can't get a degree. You can't go to a school and hear learned masters talk about these things for you like men can. How frustrating, right? And they just tell you, oh, well, just work. You're pretty enough. Just look pretty, and you'll get a husband, and then your life is complete. And so Mary Wollstonecraft comes along and says, you know what? That's demeaning. And also, it's sort of stunting society, because if we could have this whole other population of more intelligent people, then it would bring society along altogether. So vindication of the rights of women is kind of bringing that to light and changing the narrative of gender roles. So let me go through it and make some notes. I know I've been chatting about it. So it's just a powerful piece. So one of the first things she says is, and she has a couple of concessions. If you can think back to last year when you were doing a lot of rhetorical analysis, she does have some concessions in this piece. She says, on one level, she says, for whatever reason, nature made men and women different. We can all agree with that. Women have certain qualities that are prominent and men have other qualities that are prominent. And she kind of like acknowledges that either nature made us different or society has made us different, or both. And she starts off with that idea. There's going to be another concession later. She says, I think, though, that we've come to a hasty conclusion. And that hasty conclusion is the idea that women are incapable of reason, that women are incapable of profound thinking. And she has this flower metaphor that she presents. It's kind of like, she says, if you plant a flower or, you know, like a bulb in poor soil, like it's all sandy, there's no nutrients, it's going to grow feebly. It's probably not, it might blossom, but it's not going to be a strong plant. If you don't pay, if all you care about is that flower and you don't care about the nutrients of the plant, then you're going to end up with a weak plant. If, however, you take this plant and you say, okay, the flower is part of it, but also the stalk, the leaves, the roots, all these other things are important too, then you will have a stronger plant because you're going to put it in soil that has nutrients and is able to really nurture that plant to its potential. And so she says that that's a lot like how we've treated women in our society. We have given them poor soil. And by that, the metaphor is that that's the education, right? We haven't given them the richest background. So if all you care about is how they look, then that's okay. But then what do you have afterwards? She says, what we have is people who are anxious to make women alluring mistresses rather than affectionate wives and rational mothers. Because how can you be an intelligent decision maker in the raising of your children if your education has been weak, like this, you know, inert soil? And so she opens up with that metaphor and she starts building on that idea. She does give a concession. Another part of her concession is here on page 5 of this document. She says, all right, I'm going to just acknowledge that men are physically stronger than women. The way that men are built gives them more physical strength. And that's just something that exists. But that doesn't determine necessarily the potential that a person has in their mind, right? So why in this situation has society endeavored to sink us still lower if we're already physically weaker, just as a matter of fact? Why do we sort of double down on that weakness by keeping women from educating themselves in the same way that men do, right? What's the reason for that? And she says, you know, a lot of people argue that women will be too masculine. And so she kind of gets into the definition of man. And what is the fact that man has a couple of different meanings is significant to her argument. The argument is, well, if women start doing all the same things as men, then we're just going to have a society of men. And like, that's not good. I want to go home and I want my wife to be loving and I want a nice home and I want meal on the table and I want her to raise my children and all that stuff. But her response is, it's not about making women more masculine. It's about enabling the human being to flourish as much as possible in whatever direction they would like to flourish. And the fact that some avenues are closed in that sense is not fair. And I think maybe she's suggesting that a lot of men in her time period had never thought about that because they just assumed that because they had been planting these flowers in weak soil all along, that they were just weak. They never considered that if given nutrients, there could be strength there. So they just say, oh, women are dumb. Women can't possibly think to the potential of men, but that's only because women have never been given the opportunity to prove that. And that's her point. So it's not about blurring the line between feminists, what's feminine and what's masculine. It's about making sure that every human being can work to their potential should they choose to do so. Another point that she makes is just the word man, just the diction there. She says man can mean male, but man can also mean humans, like mankind. And she said, I think that it was a mistake for us to kind of do that, because sometimes we say man and we mean all people. And sometimes we say man and we mean just people who are male. And she said, so you have to kind of distinguish, when I'm talking about man, I mean mankind. All human beings have this potential. And she says that education should be an exercise of which ennobles the human character and which raises females in the scale of animal being when they are comprehensively termed mankind. So just like men, males, women are human, and they should have the same availability of education. So there's that point that she makes. There's also an element of sarcasm in this piece. This is on page 6 of the text. She says in this introduction, she's kind of laying out her points, but she's also saying, I hope you'll excuse me, and it's a sarcastic comment, if while I'm writing this treatise, that I speak to women like they're rational creatures. Hope you don't mind if I actually talk to women as if they can think. And, obviously she's being sarcastic there. But I think that sarcastic statement, it's important to note, assumes that her audience is not just masculine, which probably a lot of men assumed, that only men were reading pamphlets and women needed to go and do other women things. And so she is opening up the idea that there might be just as many women reading her pamphlets as men, that she's not writing this just for men to change their mindset about equality. In fact, she says, I will, instead of flattering their fascinating graces and viewing them as if they were in a state of perpetual childhood, unable to stand alone, I'm not going to write like that, suggesting that other people do. She says, I want to speak also to women because they should stand up and acquire the strength that they are capable of, right? I wish to persuade women to endeavor to acquire strength both of mind and body, and to convince them that the soft phrases, susceptibility of heart, delicacy of sentiment, and refinement of taste are almost synonymous with epithets of weakness. So those are good qualities, but they're not considered strong in our society. And when they're associated just with women, then, and we don't associate women with other things like reason and judgment and those sorts of concepts, then we'll always be considered weaker. Also, in her intro, she deals with the fact that others might, instead of criticizing her arguments, they might criticize her writing style. And she kind of puts them already on notice and says, if you don't like the way I'm writing, that's fine. You can criticize it, but the reason that I'm writing with clarity is because I want to make my point obvious and sort of get to the heart of the matter. So if I'm not all flowery like a lot of other people are, it's because I'm trying to focus on the clarity of my argument, not the poetic quality of my words. So she's kind of like shutting down her critics and what they might argue about before she even starts making her strong arguments. One of her strongest arguments in the pamphlet is that we need smart women raising children. If society is going to improve, then we need to all be getting smarter all the time. And women need to be able to not just look nice, they need to be able to also help raise their children, who are male and female, and they are expected to govern a family with judgment, she says. So how are you going to take that weak flower and give it a, serious job to do? It can't do it. It doesn't have the power to do it because it's been rooted in this crappy soil. Coming up to the ending here. Also in her intro, she says that what are women supposed to do after their beauty has faded? If we tell women, oh, your value is rooted in how you look and how you present yourself and how you interact with your husband and how you make a home, then what value is the woman after her looks are gone, after she's unable to do those, after the children have been raised? What is her value? If she has an education, then she's got wisdom that she can impart. She's got help that she can give her children. If she doesn't have any knowledge or education, then what does she do? Right? Then she's just a baby maker, really. And so then she uses pathos and logos to, I'm assuming that you guys have studied that, to kind of appeal to rational men, and she emphasizes rational. So she kind of says, if you're a rational thinker, you have to understand this argument that we need to give women access to education and to bettering themselves for all of these reasons in our new society. She repeats here again, if women are physically weaker, she kind of alluded to it earlier in the piece, why compound that by making them mentally weaker as well? And if God gave women the ability to think like a man at the same depth level, then why are we holding women back from doing that? How does that serve society? Is that selfish? Or is that something that we should endeavor to do as a society? So she suggests then at the end of the introduction that maybe men should back off of being overly masculine in the society's definition and give women the opportunity to improve themselves and see what happens, like an experiment, right? What if we all just sort of tried to grow? Maybe men could be more compassionate and nurturing, little, and maybe women could be more educated and knowledgeable, little, and let's see what happens. Because if women don't grow wiser, she says, it'll be clear that they have weaker understandings and they're unable to handle the mental load that men can take on when they become educated. So her argument is focused on education because for her, that's the key to improvement for women across the board. And of course, this is easy to see how a piece like this could spur or help to move along the suffrage movement, right? And women asserting themselves and their right to vote and their right to have a voice beyond just, having an education. So do y'all have any questions on my notes or anything that you want me to go over from that section? Because that's the only part that you needed to read, really. Or is there anything from the study guide? There is a study guide for this one. So if you looked that over and you have any questions, I can answer them. But I think I touched on most of the main points there. I think it's kind of hard for us to, think about a time when women weren't in school, right? When we started with kindergarten, and for generations, we've had boys and girls at school together, and that's just, how it goes. But it wasn't that long ago that women were discouraged, or young women were discouraged from like the hardcore subjects. Some of the STEM movements and women in engineering and that sort of thing, there's been actual force over the last 20 years of making it okay and as societal expectation that women can and will enter into those sorts of fields that were maybe 50 years ago dominated by men, engineering and math and science and that sort of stuff. Even when I was in high school, I'll tell you a story, and it's not that long ago. I mean, I know it probably seems like a long time for you guys, but I went to high school in the 1980s, and I wasn't allowed to take chemistry. Probably it was because I didn't have the greatest biology grades, but chemistry wasn't like now everybody just takes chemistry. It's an expectation. But you only took chemistry if the teacher teaching chemistry thought that you could do it. And when I went in to talk to my counselor about that, she said, well, do you really need chemistry? I mean, if you just get married and have some kids, is that a class that you really need to help you in life? I mean, like, do you really need that? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm 15 years old. I don't know what I need as an adult, but you're supposed to make me think that I could try. You're supposed to make me think that I could maybe give it a shot. Just because I wasn't great at biology doesn't mean that I might really groove on chemistry. So it's not that long ago that we had these perceptions about women in these roles. So yeah, I didn't go into chemistry, but I did go to college. That same counselor didn't think I needed to go to college either, because I had like a B average in school, in high school. So I mean, there's some residual stuff that's not that old, not as old as Mary Wollstonecraft. And of course, there are places in the world right now where women just aren't allowed to go to school at all. They're just not, organized by their society. It's not expected that they'll go to school. I don't think I would be happy being expected to just be a mom and basically a maid. Yeah, I mean, and it's not just about, because for some people that's their aspiration, right? And that's not a step down, or it's not a level thing. It's just that you should have the opportunity. And that's what Wollstonecraft is arguing. Women should have the opportunity to do what they want with their lives and not just go on the one track of, like you said, being a mom and being a maid and being a wife and being subservient. And if you have the choice, you should have the choice to do that. It's not that any one thing is, better than anything else. It's just that a person has the right to set up their life the way that they want it to be. And if I want to be a researcher, I should be able to forego getting married and having kids, and I just want to work on my science. I just want to work on my research. That should be acceptable in society if that's what I choose to do. So yeah, imagine how frustrating it would be if that just wasn't ever done. You weren't going to be able to go to school. Just go sit. You can read some books if you want, but we're not going to teach you anything. That's super frustrating. And obviously, Wollstonecraft's point bore fruit, because we have then the suffrage movement, and then we have, the equal rights movement. And now it'd be kind of weird if you went to school and all the girls were in home economics and all the boys were in physics, and never the twain shall meet. That would be weird to us today. And I think that's a good thing, because if you want to study whatever you want to study, you have the right to do that in many places in the world now. I don't see anything from the study guide. Is there anything on the study guide that you want me to talk about? I think it's smart of her to start talking about children, because everybody can think, well, we want the next generation to be smarter than us. We want the next generation to do better than we did. And, she kind of ties into that later in the pamphlet. The way that we can do that is by making mothers that are more mentally strong. I mean, basic middle school education is more than a woman in her time would have. Imagine leaving off your education in 8th grade. Some people have to for different reasons, but imagine not even having the opportunity. All right, I don't see anything from the study guide, but Yeah, also note, Christina, that if you were in the middle class or the aristocracy, you wouldn't be a maid. You would have maids. So you would literally, your day would be about writing letters and making invitations and making parties and embroidery, learning the piano, trying to make a pleasing household for your husband and helping to raise your children. So you'd be a mom, but you wouldn't be a maid. What do you do with your time? Well, if society tells you that's all you can be, then you're not even going to go and get that book off the shelf that your husband was reading. And so Mary Wollstonecraft starts to open up that door of possibility with this piece, and that's why it's historically important. All right. Well, if there isn't anything from the study guide today's a little short. Tomorrow will be a little short too. I'll go over the Victorian era, and I'll also introduce essay number 2, which is a longer research paper. And we don't have a discussion this week, so that maybe you can start thinking about your paper, what you might like to do. But like I said, if you've already looked at it on the link there, I'm going to change that link tonight. I'm going to update that document because I'm not super happy with the way they wrote it up. So don't tell anybody. I'm going to make it a little bit easier for you to do that paper. All right. Any final questions before I let you go for today? Okay. I will see you tomorrow, same time. It'll be probably a short period like today. And then we can go into the weekend. Next week, we're working on the Victorian era. So I will see you tomorrow. Okay, good. Bye. Have a good day.